Hello everybody, this is Michael Hollands once again for Sound of the Movies. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Marc Shaiman. On today's episode, we will talk extensively about his tremendous career as a composer and lyricist. For 30 years, Marc has enriched the world of music not only with his great scores, but also with his enormous output working on several Broadway musicals. Welcome, Marc.
Hello. How are you, Michael?
I'm pretty good. And you? How are you doing?
Very well.
Great. It's great to hear that. And thank you so much for joining me. It's a pleasure to have you on my show. And Marc, as I mentioned in my introduction, you have had this really impressive career. You not only write film scores, but you write musicals, and you work with great artists such as Bette Midler. When did it all begin for you? When did you know you wanted to pursue a career as a professional musician?
Since birth, I guess. I can't remember any time when I didn't think of myself as doing what I'm doing. Even as a kid, it just seemed obvious that this is what I would be doing.
You won a Grammy Award, an Emmy, a Tony, and you have been nominated for 7 Oscars. Did you at some point in your life lay out specific goals that you wanted to accomplish? As in, I want to end up working in Hollywood and become a successful film composer, or someday I want to write for musicals?
Well, as a kid growing up, I grew up in the 60s, so it was the last great moment of big film musicals. So, I grew up with Sound of Music and Mary Poppins and Oliver. So that was, just right there as something I was clearly very attracted to. And then once I auditioned to play piano for a kid's production of The Sound of Music when I was around 12. And from that moment on, playing for that show and then starting to become musical director for other community theater productions of all the great musicals, I just did one after another. And so, from around the time I was 13 on, I just became, fully obsessed with Broadway musicals. And at the same time, Bette Midler became a big star there in the early 70s. And I became just obsessed with her as well and the style of music that she was bringing back, because with her sense of humor and a sort of a modern look back, she was doing music from the 40s and 50s and 60s. So she was opening my ears to a lot of kind of great music that I was too young to really know about. And if I had any goal, I think it was, that I loved Bette Midler so much, I, fantasized that I would someday get to meet her and get to work with her. And then it all came true. I mean, I just had my 60th birthday the other night, and I actually said that, as a kid in that little room, I moved downstairs in my house to the room where the piano was. So I moved my bedroom down there at around that same time, I guess I was 12 or 13. And in that room, I certainly listened to a lot of music, but I'm sure the records I listened to most were Mary Poppins and Bette Midler's first 2 records. And how amazing that I ended up writing the sequel to Mary Poppins and worked with Bette Midler for 40 years now. And culminating, it's almost like out of a movie, the fact that this little boy was listening to Mary Poppins and Bette Midler, and then just last year, Bette Midler sang our song from Mary Poppins Returns at the Academy Awards.
Yes.
I mean, if you wrote that in a movie, and that was the last scene, people would say, well, this is ridiculous, this is unbelievable. But it's true.
Yeah, I mean, she gave a great performance, and it was very cool to incorporate that into the Academy Awards, especially. Also, of course, you had been nominated again for Best Original Song, which was your 7th nomination, and of course, Mary Poppins was a great success, and the album is very good.
I always want to correct Mary Poppins Returns because, unfortunately, from the moment they announced the movie, people unfortunately kept thinking it was a remake, as
Yeah.
if anyone would be crazy enough to remake Mary Poppins. I mean, we were crazy enough to make a sequel to it and try to continue the story. We knew we would still be compared to the first movie, but God knows no one was trying to do a remake. So that's been very frustrating over the last 3 years. How that affected people's perception of our movie. It just doesn't seem to go away. So pardon me for always jumping in and saying Mary Poppins Returns, because they are two different films.
Before we talk about Mary Poppins Returns, I would love to know more about the beginnings of your career, because in 1989 you had done some musical arrangements and adaptations on Rob Reiner's film, a comedy classic, When Harry Met Sally, alongside Harry Connick. Can you tell me a bit about the work on this film with Rob Reiner and how you worked on the music?
I had worked with Billy Crystal at Saturday Night Live
Yeah.
and started going on the road with him and playing for his act. And although he's not a singer, he sang one or two things within, in a comedic way. And then I would also underscore some of his monologues. And so it was a taste of like film scoring, only it was live and it was in, casinos or in theaters. But that's how I met Rob Reiner, kind of briefly. And then I started scoring Billy's HBO specials. And one in particular had real kind of film score moments in it. Just a few minutes, but they really were real kind of film score compositions. And meanwhile, at the same time, Billy, when he was making When Harry Met Sally, he asked Rob what he was going to do for the music of the movie. And Rob said, I'd love to find a guy who like knows every song and could help me figure out what songs, he knew he wanted to use the Great American Songbook. And Billy just said, "Oh, I got the guy for you. I got the perfect guy." So that's how I did When Harry Met Sally. I went to Rob with a couple of music books under my arms with ideas, they sent me the script and I had some ideas and Rob hired me. And I had that experience, which was wonderful. And then actually, Rob saw and heard a HBO special I did with Billy Crystal called Midnight Train to Moscow, and that's the one that had a couple of cues that were very much just like a film score. And the next morning, Rob called me and said, "Would you like to score my next movie, Misery?" Which was quite a departure from When Harry Met Sally.
Yes.
Uh, And I couldn't believe he had the faith that I could do that. But, if he had the faith I could do it, I figured, well, I might as well agree with him and jumped into that. But it was quite a whirlwind to go from, choosing songs and arranging songs, which is, something that comes very naturally to me. And it was a way I got to learn how music is placed into a movie, literally the logistics of it, the nuts and bolts of it.
Yes.
And then suddenly suddenly be scoring a psychological horror movie, it was quite a leap.
It was a huge transition, actually. And of course, Misery being one of the very best Stephen King adaptations. And of course, Rob Reiner is a fabulous director. And I think he did a very good job, as did the actors, and of course, as did you. And this thriller, as you said, must have posed an enormous challenge, but watching and listening to the final product, I think you did a very good job adapting to a new style.
Yeah, I mean, I learned later on how how terrible the temp score can be to a composer, because it makes the director and producers fall in love with the temp score, and you so end up having to almost imitate it to please them, which is a terrible thing for obvious reasons. I mean, it's a great way to learn how to have a conversation, a musical conversation with a director, because he can actually play you music saying, this is the kind of stuff I'm interested in. and you hopefully will write stuff that's in the same neighborhood as that. It gets really bad when they actually say, "Oh, well, it was an oboe playing in that moment for those three beats," and when they truly want you to start copying it note for note, almost, that's obviously bad. I bring that up only because in Misery they had temp scored the movie with a lot of Jerry Goldsmith and that style of music, which was far beyond my ken, which is an old fashioned term meaning my comprehension. But in that case, having that temp score, that was like college to me. I just sat there with my headphones on and analyzed this brilliant Jerry Goldsmith music, and it wasn't like I could write music anywhere as great as Jerry Goldsmith, but I could be inspired by it and I could learn from it. So it's not like I say, it's not like what I wrote comes close to anything close to what Jerry Goldsmith accomplished movie after movie. But that was my big learning experience, just listening to how the different textures of the orchestra and how like four things can be going on at the same time. Like there could be a cluster of strings doing one thing and percussive stuff doing rhythmic movement down below, and that the woodwinds can be chiming in with their own part of the conversation, and just these different kind of chords, and just it was just a great way to learn. And Lord knows, for the first few movies I worked on, I studied those temp scores to learn. And
Yeah.
then like all of the composers, then I learned to hate the temp score. But for those first few movies, it was invaluable to have that.
Yes, absolutely. I bet it is. I bet it can be very helpful, but I certainly sympathize with any artist and composer who described temp music as the bane. So there are pros and cons, obviously, but I think it can be tremendously difficult if a director or producer has their heart set on a certain cue, on a certain motif or a certain tone. So I think to a big extent it can diminish the creativity a lot.
Sometimes, even strangely enough, I can't remember specifically, but I know there were moments where it was my own music in the temp score. So sometimes it's not even like they're asking you to imitate another composer. Here was a moments where I was being asked to basically repeat myself,
Yes.
which became a whole other kind of bad thing where I felt like I just was scoring the same movie and writing the same cues over and over again. That was towards like the end of the 90s when I'd been doing it an entire decade, and I found myself just almost literally writing the same cue for a different movie.
That doesn't really promote creativity, so I totally understand, and it's very difficult and probably lots of back and forth and a struggle involved every time you make a new movie, so it's very difficult. But having worked on so many pictures, Mark, I mean, you have worked on comedies, thrillers, and other great movies. Which genre or which type of music would you describe as right up your alley?
I did an awful lot of romantic comedies, and I know I have a good comedic sense and comedic timing, so I know I'm well suited for those. But the two scores I would most want to be heard to represent me would be The American President and Mary Poppins Returns. I mean,
Yes.
especially Mary Poppins Returns. I mean, Mary Poppins Returns was truly, from beginning to end, musically speaking, just what I always wanted to be doing. So every note, every melody, every chord, every harmony, every orchestration, everything about it. And I think I can speak also for the orchestrators themselves, if not also the orchestra. We all were having that same experience of this was the kind of music that we all grew up wanting to be writing or orchestrating or playing. It's what we thought of as, movie music.
Yes.
And so that was, I'm very grateful to have finally had that movie to get to do all that.
Yes. I mean, and the movies you worked on, they offer a broad palette for a composer, and also movies like Patch Adams, with which have comedic elements but also very serious tone to them, and Sleepless in Seattle, for instance, Tom Hanks' Meg Ryan movie, for which he also received another Oscar nomination for one of the songs. So I think it offers you a tremendous challenge to be comedic and also be serious with your music.
Yeah, I was lucky that I did get to, and any film composer would feel the same way. And I'm lucky also that I did get the chance to finally start writing songs for movies as well. So, and that's not something that all film composers do or maybe want to do or get to do. But I was happy, and even just arranging music, things like Sister Act and When Harry
Yeah.
Met Sally, and I love arranging existing music and finding out, or the end of the First Wives Club when they sing "You Don't Own Me."
Yeah.
Those kind of moments are just as special to me as composing my own music. I really don't make any difference in my mind between composing, arranging, orchestrating. It's all just a way to convey emotion via music or lyrics. That's another thing. To get to write lyrics for a movie was also, really thrilling. To get to co-write lyrics for the South Park movie
Yes.
was for me, up to that point, was finally getting a chance. I mean, the South Park movie was really the moment where I had the most contentment because I was getting to really do it all. Write film score, to co-write music with Trey Parker, who's just brilliant, to get to write, lyrics with him, and music, and arrange songs that he had already used on the TV show, and I even get to sing. I'm sometimes I'm singing in that movie. I just really got to do everything. So it was kind of wonderful that Hairspray came after that and brought me back to New York and Broadway, because in truth, the South Park movie really kind of, that was it. I was getting finally to do everything, and
Yeah.
there wasn't much left for me to do. It wasn't until, almost 20 years later that Mary Poppins Returns came around, and really I got to do a much different version than the South Park movie, of getting to do all those different things, music, lyrics, orchestrating, arranging,
Yeah.
to take the themes from the first movie and get to use them in the film score in hopefully the best, most emotional way.
Yeah.
That was as thrilling as writing, my own original compositions. Maybe even more so.
Great. So South Park also could be described as the total package for you, or the best opportunity for you as a composer to shine. Writing lyrics, doing some arrangements, and of course I just listened to South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut just yesterday, and I must say it serves as a very good movie musical. I mean, first of all, it's hilarious to a certain degree. The lyrics, but it contains some very great musical arrangements. And for Blame Canada, you got another Academy Award nomination, actually. But you work closely with Trey Parker, as I understand. And is he also a trained musician? Does he have a musical background? How did you manage to work together?
It was really easy because, besides being brilliant, he's also extremely collaborative. And once he trusted that I got their sense of humor, and that I also had the knowledge of how to realize it, which is how I was put on that movie. The producer, Scott Rudin, just had well, easy for me to say, the great idea to, put me together with Trey, so that I was sort of like the professor. I mean, I wasn't that much older than Trey. I think we're pretty much the same age, as a matter of fact. But I could just, if Trey had an idea of like, oh, I want this to be this style of music or whatever, I had the goods to be able to realize that. And also, just to take some of the things that he had written in the script and figure out how to adapt them into, I don't know. It was just it was just great teamwork. Sometimes he would write, a verse and a chorus of a song and say, here, you can finish this. I got to go off to animate next week's show. The trust that he had in me was really a fulfilling feeling. And when someone trusts you like that, you really find yourself soaring on the wings that he has given you. And I remember on that movie having the most amazing experience of scoring sessions without a director, because Trey was the director, but he was so busy animating the movie, and he trusted me so that it was the first time I was alone with an orchestra without a producer or director over my shoulder telling me to hurry up or questioning every single note. It was just so wonderful to get to play with the orchestra that way without any of the normal, uh, school
Yeah.
feeling like you're in school.
Having that level of trust is certainly amazing because I think it enables any person to be more creative, and it's like a safety net. Also, I would like to think of it that way, and it offers a certain amount of security. And Mark, may I ask why things didn't seem to quite work out on Team America World Police, or is that a sore subject with you?
Oh, it was a sore subject, of course. I mean, but I was myself about to say to you, ironically, everything that I just said about the trust on South Park, it occurred also on Team America, and I was completely by myself with the orchestra for I think the first 3 days out of 5 days of scoring. Maybe it was even the fourth day.
Okay.
And then when Trey heard the music, it wasn't what he wanted. I had followed the action too specifically, and he had never really conveyed this to me. He just wanted it to be what he felt was cookie cutter music, like he had gone to a music factory. That's how he felt about music of certain kind of movies of the time. That it was just okay. Give me 5 minutes of car chase music, and for it to seem like it wasn't even almost specifically written for the movie. So everything that was wonderful about South Park ended up disastrously happening on Team America on like the fourth day of, literally almost a day away from finishing the score.
Oh God.
Working on the movie was hysterical. I still can remember me and my team up at my home studio laughing all day long as we were working on the movie. And then suddenly everything fell apart, and I was put under house arrest, where I said to them, I can't, in a week and a half, completely figure out another way to write this music.
Yeah.
Please don't make me even try. I mean, I'm devastated. Now, other professionals maybe could have said, oh, okay, let me rethink this and deliver it in 10 days. But I felt it will be easier for someone else to come in here and listen to what you want and do what you want. And they begrudgingly agreed. I think Trey agreed. The producers and Paramount might have felt like, well, wait, we've paid you. You need to finish the job. But so I was put under house arrest. I wasn't allowed to basically leave the state until they had their new score finished in case they needed me in some way
Okay.
to still work. So it was absolutely devastating. Of course, now it's been 20 years or something, and
Yeah.
I've had, bigger devastations before and after, so it's just one of many. But I still only have fantastic feelings for everyone involved with that because they're brilliant. And it was just unfortunate that the communication didn't happen. But the communication didn't happen because of what I was saying, just because of the trust that was there. So, it doesn't always work out.
Yes.
But that's that whole story.
Yeah. I hope it didn't make you feel uncomfortable talking about this.
No, it's been 3,000 years.
I have just always been interested in learning how that really came about. I know that the composer who came in with his musical team, Harry Gregson Williams, had to pull it off miraculously under probably the most tight or the tightest of deadlines you could possibly imagine. So.
And it almost made more sense because since Trey didn't want it to match moment by moment in the movie, it was almost then easier for someone to say, "Okay, I will give you 5 minutes of chase music." And since Harry came from the Hans Zimmer world of where there is a sort of factory to it, but I mean, it's all very creative. Hans Zimmer and what he has going there is unbelievable. So I don't say this in any kind of derogatory way, but
Yeah.
since he came out of that world, it was a perfect choice, really. Um, if only they had thought of it earlier. Uh,
Yeah.
I've never watched that movie. It is too heartbreaking to watch.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Sure.
I think I now at this point in my life I could watch it. I do remember the only other score I had thrown out was Honeymoon in Vegas.
Ah, yes.
And and that one I thought, okay, I'm going to go see it and I'll learn so much. I'll get to hear what someone else did, which will be closer to what the filmmakers wanted. Now meanwhile, while I was scoring the movie, the filmmakers all seemed very happy. They just had one screening that didn't go well enough,
Hmm.
and they decided it was the score's fault.
Yeah.
Um, and I went to see the movie when it came out. Really, very healthily said, "Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna learn. This will be a good experience to learn something." And basically, the score sounded exactly like what I had written, and I learned nothing.
Uh, it's one of those experiences in life which I think don't make any sense. And I know this has happened to many composers that the final product seemed very close to the rejected score, and people kind of, shook their heads in disbelief.
Yeah, but I got nice telegrams from like Henry Mancini, people saying like, "Welcome to the club, kid. You've had your first score thrown out."
And Mark, I know we don't have that much time today. Before we talk about Broadway and Mary Poppins, I would love to thank you for delivering music for two of my all-time favorite movies that I loved growing up, the Sister Act films. You had worked on the score on the first one, and you also, worked up these incredible arrangements for the film, and also then your Sister Act 2. Could you tell me perhaps how you selected those songs for those movies and how you rearranged them on top of your score for the first one?
The first one, it's sort of interesting, and I am definitely patting myself on the back because there was this strange thing that happened. I don't know if they have figured out since, but at that time there was this thing called the Rear Window clause, where like the niece of the man who wrote the book that the Hitchcock movie Rear Window was based on successfully sued the movie company saying, "My uncle had nothing in his deal that talked about video rights." So when they started putting out, Blockbuster Video, when the whole craze of having home video,
Yeah.
she successfully sued a movie studio saying, "You've got to pay us because there's nothing in his deal about this." So because of that, there was a certain time limit. I'm not explaining this very well. All I know is that on Sister Act, a movie that was completely about the girl groups, and that the lead character was supposed to be bringing the music of the girl groups to this nuns. They told me I could only use music from like 1960 and 61, and like starting in 1962, I think it was all off limits. So all of the great music that the screenwriter had put in his script, songs like "Going to the Chapel" and "Your Love Is Lifting Me Higher and Higher," none of it could be used. And I was like, my God, uh, what am I going to do? And luckily, I just came up with like the very few songs that still made sense, but they weren't really girl group songs. My Guy, "Nothing You Can Say Can Take Me Away from My Guy."
Yeah.
That's not a girl. It sounds like a girl group song. It was Mary Wells, with backup singers, making it sound like a girl group, but it wasn't. And then I will follow him wherever he may go.
Lovely, yeah.
And those ended up being like the main songs in the movie. So I just kind of got lucky there, and was able to pull off what the movie needed, even though all those great years of the Supremes and the Ronettes, it was all off limits. Anyway, that was a movie that I just had such a great time. I love the music of the '60s. I grew up in the '60s. I was still, a toddler when that music was, on the radio. In 1963, I was 3 years old, but I did. It was still in my head. And then once I moved to New York, I ended up just constantly getting attached to shows and acts that somehow were related to the '60s. I worked on a show called Leader of the Pack that was the music of a great songwriter named Ellie Greenwich. And then when Hairspray came along, it was this full-on celebration of the '60s, and so it seems to have followed me throughout my whole life. And Sister Act was just a great opportunity to arrange these songs, and then we had so much fun scoring the movie. Anyway, I'm just full of 3,000 memories, but it was a great experience. And then Sister Act 2 was phenomenal also, getting to work with Mervyn Warren, who's a brilliant, brilliant arranger, and his work is really what made Sister Act 2 become the success that it was. His work with the kids, his brilliant gospel jazz arrangements are just, brilliant. And I was more like how it was on South Park. I was more helping Mervyn figure out how you arrange and work on music for movies, and got to just really steer him.
Yeah.
Just a million memories.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing this with me, Mark. Now I'd love to talk a little bit about your work on Broadway theater, which has been tremendous so far. I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you started working, or you basically finished your first Broadway musical in 1979, if I'm correct.
It was the first time I worked on Broadway.
Yeah.
I wasn't writing musicals yet, but the first thing I did, I was the musical director for performer Peter Allen, who Hugh Jackman ended up portraying in the musical The Boy from Oz. But I worked with the actual Peter Allen, and I was his musical director when I was 19 in 1979.
Amazing.
And then did, a couple of other Broadway concerts with Bette Midler and Patti LuPone, and this show I just mentioned, Leader of the Pack. But I didn't actually have my own musical on Broadway until Hairspray in 2002, I guess. I don't remember.
I think 2002 or 2003, yes. And you had worked on the project with Scott Whitman, if I remember correctly. And you've worked together for so many years, and you've done great work. And your Broadway work has been very inspiring, Hairspray and also Catch Me If You Can. Could you tell me how much time goes into conceptualizing and preparing and writing the music for a Broadway spectacle?
It's endless. It's an endless process. I wish I was living in the 1950s. All the all-time great musicals, they were basically written in a year. Like Rodgers and Hammerstein, the kings of musical theater, they would go from the opening night of one show and they'd sit down the next day and say, okay, what's next? And a year later, they'd have the next show on Broadway. Well, it doesn't happen that way anymore. Now there's years and years of development, and it just goes on forever and ever. And, you keep collaborating and come up with new ideas for different needs, songs that need, a character needs to be drawn out in a way that you need to write a different song. It used to happen on the road. Broadway shows would go on the road, and for 3 months they would play many different towns and get rewritten every day, and there would be new material every night. They don't have the budget to do that anymore, and so they do it within these workshops that get spaced out over every few months, which is why it just takes years and years. It's not that consolidated time on the road. I'm writing a musical right now, a new musical of Some Like It Hot.
Yeah.
and we started working on it probably around maybe 3 years ago, and we're still writing. I literally, the phone call that I had this morning that I had to ask you to delay our interview here was about adapting a song that we've already written and figuring out how to start it differently so a different character starts it and plants the seed of the idea of the song with the first verse, and then it moves on to the other girls in the band. And so Scott and I are going to have to not completely go back to the drawing board, but just have to figure out, okay, if this character starts the song, we need to rewrite the lyrics in some way that match his character and work our way towards what we've already written. It just goes on and on and on. It's just an endless process.
Yeah. And Some Like It Hot is scheduled to premiere at some point next year already, right?
Yeah, it's a year and a half even. It's yeah, yeah. I can't believe it. I'm going to be practically dead by the time it arrives on Broadway.
I think you will do a tremendous job, and I'm looking forward to experiencing the music. And now I would love to talk about Mary Poppins, if we still have some time left. The original Mary Poppins, as you mentioned, was released in '63, and in 2018 you worked on Mary Poppins Returns. You wrote the score, and you also collaborated again with Scott Whitman on the songs. How important was it for you to honor the original Mary Poppins, which came out in the '60s, and its legacy, and tell me a bit how you paid homage to it, so to speak?
Yeah, it was the movie that was most important to me as a child, and it was so frightening, to take on the sequel, knowing that we would get beat up for daring to even try to, you know, write anything that continued the story and to pick up, where the Sherman brothers left off, which, they left off with perfection. So how can you possibly, you know, we knew there's no way to match the perfection of the Sherman brothers songs in that movie. It was, even for themselves, it was their pinnacle, it was their peak. But eventually, Scott and I figured out, instead of being fearful, it was a way to express our love for them and for those songs and for that movie, and not just them, but also Irwin Kostal, who was the music supervisor, music director, orchestrator, arranger. His musical sensibilities are just as much a part of the original Mary Poppins movie as the Sherman Brothers songs and Julie Andrews' performance. I mean, Irwin Kostal is truly, the meat and potatoes of Mary Poppins. And like I mentioned earlier at the beginning of our interview, that was the style of music I grew up listening to, and that was just, what I wanted to do. I wanted to continue writing stuff in that style. And so when Mary Poppins Returns came along, and like I said, it was not just me, but my orchestrators and the orchestra themselves getting to play that style of music, which, especially in the last 10 years or more, where film score has so changed, and
Yes.
the orchestras get so used to now just sitting on a whole note, while, more computer style rhythmic stuff has come to the forefront. And it's also brilliant, but it's very different, and it's not like what we grew up on.
Yeah.
So Poppins Returns allowed us all to just, jump into the warm waters of this style of music, and this kind of emotion through music. And it was just thrilling. The weeks with the orchestra on Mary Poppins Returns were the absolute best experiences of my life, musically speaking, creatively speaking. It was just an absolute fantasy, a total joy. And that all we wanted to do was just pay homage to these great men and women who created the first film, and that was what I think we accomplished that. I think our love for the first movie becomes very apparent, which is also why it became so frustrating that, because when they announced the movie, they did not announce it well. and the fact that it became thought of as a remake. And so the very people who would most love Mary Poppins Returns are people like myself who love the first movie with all their heart and soul.
Yes.
And that's who we made this music that this movie for. Hopefully new people enjoyed it as well, but it truly was made for those who love the first movie, and it was a way to it's a movie about reawakening the things that you loved as a child
Yes.
and embracing them and realizing it's not corny, it's not bad to reawaken. That's what the whole movie ends up being about, where
Yeah.
Michael Banks finally lifts off at the end when he finally says, "Oh my God, it's true. All those things that we did with Mary Poppins, it really happened." I get moved just saying that now. So it was very frustrating that people who would most have gotten something out of it might have even stayed away from our movie because they were outraged because they had misunderstood what we had created. Anyway, luckily enough, people did go and did enjoy it, and I'm very glad it happened.
Did you on this project write a score cue and then deliver an idea for a song? How did that happen?
No, I mean, a movie is scored after it's filmed. So we clearly, obviously, wrote the songs before it was filmed because for them to be filmed. But in this case, Rob Marshall was very unique that he said to me before the recording sessions for the songs, before the movie was filmed, he asked me to write some score cues. And I was like, Rob, are you insane? How can I write a score cue to a movie that doesn't exist yet?
Yeah.
I have to know when the kid comes out of the bushes and sees the kite in the sky, and when the new storm clouds come, that will change the music, and I need to know. He said, you can do it, just read the script. And so over a Christmas holiday that we had before the first recording sessions, I went home and I read the script, and then I just read the script into my computer like it was a radio play. And I read the stage directions about, just what I just described. The kid is running through the park and the storm clouds are brewing. And then suddenly Mary Poppins appears through the clouds. And I just read it all with as much emotion as I could bring to it, as much excitement as if I was a man on the radio telling a story. And then with that as my guide, I started writing music to my narration.
Right.
And I would move my narration around when I suddenly found myself writing something that needed another bar or two before the next piece of narration came in. I would move it around. And so when it came time to go to recording sessions that next month and back in England, we did record I think around 15 minutes worth of score, which is crazy. And I still thought, Rob, you're crazy, and I can't believe that you've gotten Disney to agree to pay for an orchestra to record score for that will never appear in the movie, because there's no way that this will match what you end up doing. But he listened to it all the time. He played it on the set, and lo and behold, absolutely everything I recorded at those sessions is all in the movie.
Amazing.
I only had to go in and adjust a few things here and there, extend a measure a little here, or add another 2 beats here. But for the most part, all those cues are in there. Rob was just so sure of what he wanted to bring to the screen that it was this very unique experience.
Amazing, amazing story. And how closely did you have to work with the actors on this project?
Very, very closely, very intimately. And we wrote many songs on our way to the songs that ended up being in the movie. So
Yeah.
Emily Blunt was luckily living in New York and filming a movie in New York, and she would come over every few weeks, and we would say, let's try this song on you. And she would give her all to whatever we wrote. She would completely commit herself to, and we would get to hear what worked or what didn't work. And the same thing with Lin-Manuel. He would come in and so we had this wonderful experience of really getting to bespoke, to fit the songs on our lead actors, so that by the time it was time to record the songs, we had exhausted all the possibilities of what it could be or what it should or shouldn't be. And
Thank you for sharing those great stories about Mary Poppins Returns, and I'm impressed with the result and also how you worked with the actors, because not every actor is necessarily a great vocalist, a great performer, a great singer. So working with actors and actually creating something of this caliber, that's really an achievement in itself. And I would love to thank you for taking so much time out of your busy schedule for me today. It was a joy talking to you. It was a pleasure talking to you. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
well, sure, there's an old line from a Joan Crawford movie, which just shows you how gay I am, to quote a Joan Crawford movie, where she says, "If the talk's about me, I'll buy a ticket." So yeah, it was a pleasure, because when I talk about this stuff, I am flooded with memories. Just the time working on Sister Act, for instance.
Yeah.
By talking to you about that, I'm flooded with such happy memories, mostly of just laughing hysterically. That me and my collaborators, with Whoopi Goldberg on down, we just laughed so much making those movies. So it's nice to relive that.
Great. I'm sure you have many more stories to tell, and if you have time in the future, I would love to chat again. And
Sure.
thank you very much again. It was a tremendous experience talking to you, and I am looking forward to your future projects. So thank you. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, Michael.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.